Hello, I'm Michael Krasinski, the founder and head coach at Wasatch Fitness Academy in Mountain Strong, a training community in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is our first video in what will be a four-part series addressing the topic of gym training for endurance and mountain athletes. The four big topics broken into those four videos are: why should endurance and mountain athletes spend time training in the gym? What should endurance and mountain athletes do when they're in the gym? How should endurance and mountain athletes train? Should we train purely for strength, for size, for power, for mobility? And when should we train? How do we plan our training for preseason, in season, and out of season windows? What if we have ways that we love to play all year long? And how do we plan out training in the weekly and monthly windows of time so we can still do the other stuff that we love, like run, hike, ride, climb, or ski? As a starting point, let's define what we mean by endurance and mountain athletes. And we'll do that through exclusion, all types of athletes that we're not. And there's nothing wrong with any of these other athletic endeavors. I've played around, I've dabbled in a bunch of these. But when we're talking about performance on the trail or on the mountain, these things as exclusions can be really helpful. So first, we're not strength athletes. Our performance isn't solely determined by strength. We're not powerlifters who are going to squat and bench press and deadlift for one rep for max weight. We're not CrossFitters who have to demonstrate strength across a number of events over a course of a few days. We're not strongman lifting heavy stones and flipping big tires, and we're not Olympic weightlifters throwing heavy weight overhead. We're also not physique athletes. We're not getting on stage so that we can have our physiques judged against other competitors. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And the physique sport has a lot of impact on how we should train. Physique athletes are among the best in terms of thinking of how to maximize results for their time. But their goal of being big is not really our goal for mountain endurance athletes. We're also not power athletes. We're not throwing a javelin. We're not running through other players on a football field. Instead, what do we love to do? We love to run and ride and hike and climb and ski. And all of these sports are interesting because they do require a combination of cardiovascular efficiency as well as strength. And that strength work is almost always submaximal. We're rarely limited by absolute muscular failure. We can certainly be limited by our muscles feeling burn or feeling tired, but that's different than true failure. The category that we're talking about also includes those of us who simply want to age well, with enough muscle to protect us from falls and the independence to go to the grocery store on our own, to drive there, carry in our own bags of groceries, get on the ground, play with our kids and our grandkids. So these ideas also apply to the simply be healthy goal. And there's even fewer rules, especially around the win topic, as we start to get into how we think about training across a season or across a year or even just in the week, and balancing our outdoor time with our gym time. So with our identities defined, let's get into the why people like us should spend time training in the gym. I'm going to break that into three categories. There's performance, how we do on the day. There is durability, which is kind of how we do on the day and the day after and our ability to keep coming back. And there's longevity, which is our ability to do the things that we love to do for decades into the future. So first, let's dig into performance. So this is your ability to do the sport or activity. When we spend time in the gym, we can develop strength and power. So this can show up as the ability to push off in a stride or bound over a stream, to drive the pedals of a mountain bike through a rock garden, to accelerate out of a stoplight on a road bike. It can also be our ability to pull really hard on a hold while climbing. And these are moments where we need near maximal power. More strength is the answer. Power is strength and time. It's a two variable equation. The more strength you have, the more power you can generate, the more power you can demonstrate. And the controlled environment of the gym is the best place for us to develop that potential for power. Now, I say potential because we still need to practice that power output in the exact situation. You still have to have the skill, and the skill is developed while we're on the trail or the climb. So while I could generate lots of pushing strength for mountain biking, and I use that strength to generate power when I hit the rock garden, I can generate the strength in the gym, but that exact demonstration is actually something that has to be practiced on the trail. So it's not an either or, right? The gym isn't enough but also the trail is often not enough. Also here, while we improve our endurance when we're in the gym, and we're talking specifically about muscular endurance, so think about the people that you see finishing a marathon. A high percentage of them are probably hunched over at the end, in part because the muscles of the back that were responsible for posture and holding them up didn't have the endurance to keep doing that job for 4 hours. So what's the solution? Well, drive up your postural strength with exercises like rows and pull-ups, the muscles that strengthen the back. So the challenge of a marathon or a trail race or an 80-mile mountain bike race requires a lower percentage of your total strength, right? The goal is always to be stronger than needed for the task, so that the task requires a lower percentage of your strength, because that's the basis of muscular endurance. And so the same applies in climbing too. If you're on a route and most of that route uses less of your strength capacity, i.e. it uses a lower percentage of your available strength, that means you're working less hard most of the time. And that's going to leave you with more in the tank for those hard efforts. And finally, there's an aspect of mental toughness which can be built in the gym. Of course, if you're going out for a 24-hour trail race, the only way to prepare your mind for that is to actually do it. However, in the gym, you can challenge yourself with hard things, and you can develop the view of yourself as a person who completes hard things. You can change your identity through the work of the gym. And when you change your identity to the kind of person who completes hard things, that will absolutely increase the likelihood that you complete the 100-mile trail race. Next, let's talk about durability. This is your ability to keep moving and stave off injury and recover more quickly. When we train for things like agility in the gym, right, and the gym being this controlled environment, which is great because that means that we can repeat the task, we can repeat the training to build the skill. When we do that in the gym, we do that with agility, for example, then we speed up the brain's reaction time to instability. So instead of rolling your ankle when your foot slides on a wet rock, you've actually trained yourself to adjust your center of mass onto the other more stable foot, thereby reducing the likelihood of injury. And we can improve our mobility as well. And this is our range of motion. I like to think of mobility and flexibility as two different things. Flexibility is how far can your joint move, right? How far can someone take your arm through its range of motion? That's different than how far can you take your joint through that range of motion, that active range of motion. And that's what I like to think of as mobility. So mobility is a big deal. It has an injury. There's an injury prevention value to this. And the most effective method that we know for improving mobility is a full range of motion loaded stretch. And this is really just another way of saying, you know what? Lifting performed with really great technique. Give you an example of this. Lots of folks complain of having tight hamstrings. And if you have tight hamstrings, what that means in part is that your brain is always sending a low intensity signal to the hamstrings to maintain tension. And we want that tension to be reduced. We want the hamstrings to feel looser. That means that we need to reduce that tension. Well, how do we reduce that tension? One of the greatest things we can do to reduce tension in the hamstrings is to load the hamstrings and take them through an engaged, actively controlled stretch. You know what that can look like? It can look like an exercise that we call a stiff-legged deadlift. And so rather than spending time in a yoga class working on touching your toes and in that forward fold, where if the hamstrings are tight, the back ends up taking up more of that slack, the back ends up doing more of the folding. Instead, we spend time with a bar in our hands or dumbbells in our hands, hinging forward, moving at the hips, purely challenging the hamstrings. And if you're really tight, you're not going to go very far at first. But within 6 or 12 weeks, it is reasonable to think that we would see big, notable changes in range of motion. And that change in range of motion is going to stick because you have taught your brain, hey, this is a place that it's safe for us to go. Back to durability, the last piece here. We can also improve our injury resilience. And so when we improve our agility and our mobility, right, we are improving our control and we're increasing our range of motion. Plus, we spend that time in the gym, which can strengthen our muscles and our tendons. We reduce the likelihood of injury. And by being stronger when those tweaks or injuries do occur, we can recover quicker and easier. My old shoulder surgery is my best evidence of this here, because my mobility prior to my injury was really good. Even when I lost them with the surgery, it came back quickly. And because I was already experienced in the gym, I knew how to train to speed up my recovery. Finally, my experience also made me a better consumer of information from my surgeon and my physical therapist. And that's really impacted my headspace. I'm really confident that I'm going to successfully return to mountain biking, climbing, and skiing. And I know that a large part of that is that I don't just trust my physical therapist and my orthopedic surgeon, which I do, but the part of the root of that trust is that I know what they're talking about. And I know that because of my time training, my time in the gym, and yes, my time coaching as well, obviously. That's certainly an amplifier. However, even when I wasn't coaching, when I wasn't teaching movement, I was a consumer of information around movement, and that very much helped me recover with more information from some past injuries as well. And third big category here is longevity. Our time in the gym can absolutely boost our longevity. As we age, we tend to lose muscle mass, and it gets harder to add muscle as well. So building muscle now, while you're in your 20s or 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even your 70s, is an investment in your future. If you love to hike, it's probably safe to say you're not going to be limited by your cardiovascular system, because I'm going to guess you're going to keep hiking. But you might be limited by your knees, your hips, or your back, because you have lost muscle, and that is muscle you could have kept. And the first way to address future muscle loss is to invest more heavily now. Think of it as the glide slope of a paper airplane, right? If you're in a competition with someone else and they say, hey, whoever wins, and winning is defined as having your paper airplane go the furthest. Whoever wins is going to get $10,000 cash. And they're like, all right, cool. And they say, yeah, you can develop whatever plane you want. And so you do some research and you figure out, hey, here's a really good design for a paper airplane. And there's never a conversation about how high up you get to start. If you build a moderately good paper airplane, but you can start way higher than the competition, the likelihood, I'd say, is that you're going to win, because you've got a much longer glide slope. You've got a much longer glide path. And so how do we build a glide path? How do we start with a really high glide path? Well, build a lot of muscle now so that even if some is lost, you still have plenty for the things that you need. And also on the topic of longevity, I want to talk a little bit about the brain. So just as the muscles can atrophy, so can the brain. How do we invest in the brain muscle? Well, we learn and engage in new things regularly. And training in the gym, keeping some variety in your training, is really good for your brain plasticity. And when I say variety in training, I don't mean do something new every single day. That actually is counterproductive, because you're not really learning, right? You're always stimulating with new information, but you're never moving towards mastery. And part of this brain plasticity research has told us that it's not just exposure, it's actually movement towards mastery. And so don't make changes every session, but make changes to your training every 2 to 3 months, which is probably about the amount of time that you're going to want to train before you focus back into your other activities. Little bonus option, you can always learn to solve a Rubik's Cube too. Things like this, I think it probably took me 3 or 4 weeks to master the beginner method for the Rubik's Cube, to the place where I could consistently solve the cube in 75 to 90 seconds, which in no way is a world record. But it was a really good starting point for me to get my solve times down there. And it's one of those things that I can just always return to. I find it stress relieving now that I've mastered it. There's a bunch of frustration up front. But it's little things like this, right? You can invest in a $10 cube or get the Lego version. But when you have these kinds of things in your life, whether it's this or training, we know that outcome for the brain plasticity is really positive. So I'm going to leave it there for this one. The next episode is going to dive into what endurance and mountain athletes should be doing at the gym. And again, the what is also going to apply to all of us who are in this for aging well, playing for a long time with our kids and our grandkids. So please stay tuned for that. I hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you next time.